Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Threat Talk. I'm your host, Bob Hansman, and today's Threat Talk is going to focus on security dwell time. Now, 40 years ago, malware typically was just a single file intended to destroy or disrupt things so that some unpopular nerd could go ahead and brag about how smart they were. Now, then the profiteers began using malware for more smash and grab attacks to steal massive amounts of valuable data like credit cards. But it was all just get in, do your thing, and be done. But malware then evolved to use what we refer to as the low and slow tactics so that they could remain hidden and be persistent. I mean, that's where actually this advanced persistent threat concept came from, is these attacks are designed, and the term dwell time is used to describe the amount of time that they can remain active on your network. To help us dig into this, we have invited Gary Cox, who has held a number of technical leadership positions within Infoblox over the years and working with organizations throughout Europe on security detection, investigation, and response issues. So thank you for joining us today, Gary.
Hi, Bob. Thank you for having me.
Now, I wanted to start by clarifying what we mean by dwell time, and I kind of gave a general definition. Do you have like a more precise definition for what is dwell time?
Yeah, so I mean, a general concept for dwell time is it's the how long it takes us to detect something, so how long it's been hanging around on the network, combined with how long it takes us to remediate, so how long it takes us to fix the problem. So if we add those two time frames together, that typically gives us our dwell time for that particular incident.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to clarify because there's a lot of reports out there about dwell time, but all they talk about is the hidden time. And once it's detected, then it's not dwelling. It's, I don't know, it's doing something else. But I like that more complete definition, which is what most security companies now consider. But the term is a little confused. But I mean, and it's dwell time. We talk about it being on the network. And I like that because it's no longer about it being on a device, because it's going to get in via a device and then it might actually move to another device. And that first device that was infected, a lot of malware even cleans up behind itself. So it removes any indicators that it was there at one point. And so that, that makes it pretty complicated, particularly when we're now talking devices like IoT and even now operational technologies, right?
Absolutely. It's an ever evolving, ever changing landscape. The actors don't rest on their laurels, right? What worked for them a year ago, 2 years ago, might still work with some organizations, but not with all, right? Because we all adapt and adjust. We're constantly fine tuning the controls that we're deploying in our networks and the technologies and those stacks and how we respond. It's a game of cat and mouse, and I guess it always has been, and for the foreseeable, it kind of always will be, really.
Well, and it's because, again, as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, we have those smash and grab early attacks just came in and did their damage on whatever machine they ended up on. They didn't do any movement around the network or anything, whereas today's attacks, part of that dwell time is, the reason they dwell is not just to sit there and collect credit cards over, months or even years. I remember the first time I ran into this term was because of the United States. The FBI had captured somebody or caught somebody who was doing cyber attacks. But this is in the early days, and the FBI didn't have its own real pool of experts. So they offered this person a deal. Hey, you won't do prison time, but you're going to work for us and help us. And they used him as a consultant. And one of the things that they did was they went to a bank that had suffered a breach. They brought in their consultant, and the consultant, while he was checking out the machines, actually installed his own stuff that later on they discovered it after over 2 years, where it was just stealing credit cards. Just a few credit card numbers every couple of hours. I mean, it was so small, but it was enough that this guy was making a little extra money on the side and nobody seemed to know. And, but on that one, he installed the malware, but most criminals don't have physical access to your system. So they end up, getting in through like a receptionist, low security, low criticality kind of system, not even a mission critical system, and then slowly moving through the network, or like Target through HVAC systems, which goes to that OT kind of stuff. So they'll get in through the OT to get to the network. Some go to the network to get to the OT. They move around all over the place, and they're doing this all under the radar. So dwell time, a lot of that is just the bad guys moving around your network.
Yeah, and I think, Bob, if you look at the landscape we all operate in nowadays, we've got roaming workforces. We're coming in and out of our offices. We've got BYOD devices. They're not always a lockdown corporate device. They're coming on and off the network. There's many ways into the network. I think in some ways it's actually sensible to operate as if you've already been breached. If you have the mindset, there's already something in my network, that's a good mindset to be in, because at least then you're in a state of prepared readiness, if you will.
And so you and I were talking, as we were fleshing out the topic for today about how do they stay under that radar. And you pointed out that, like in Target, where they breached it going through the HVAC system, they learned later that, oh yeah, now that we know we've been breached, we go back and we look through and, we can see all the indicators that were in our system, but they were just lost in the noise. I mean, they're not just low and slow because they're not showing up. They're low and slow because they can hide in all the other stuff that's going on, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's the number of customers I talk to who are, they've got really, really good security analysts, SecOps people, but they are drowning underneath the volume of alerts and events that they've got coming from across their entire stack of security controls. And if you've got a team, and let's be optimistic and say I've got a team of 5 people, right? How many alerts can that team of 5 people get through in a day, right? Maybe they take 5 each, maybe they take 10 each. That's 25 alerts, 50 alerts. What happens if I'm getting 10,000 alerts a day, right? So if that's the Monday, by the time I reach the Friday, and heaven forbids the following Monday, I'm drowning. And that's just 1 week. There's 52 of those in a year. You can start to see how it becomes very, very easy for the signal that we're looking for to be hidden in that noise.
Yeah, I think the SANS group SANS Institute did a survey about a year ago, maybe only about 7 or 8 months ago, but it was on a number of SOC best practices. And when they asked them about investigation time, you talked about people getting through 10 a day. They said that their typical investigations, over half of the respondents said their typical investigations took over 4 hours. That means that they only do 2 a day. So it sounds like a lot of the work's not so much the investigation, but the early triage, making sure that, do these events pop up in the triage stage, right?
Yeah, and I would fully believe that study from SANS, right? I was just being lazy for the sake of easy math. Yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem. I'm only the biggest companies out there that have got a fully teamed, with 20, 30 or more people inside their security operations, are kind of on top of this. And even they probably aren't fully on top of this, because the bigger the organization, the more events, the more alerts, the more security controls. So, I think this is a problem that is prevalent across the industry. And, candidly, this is where all of us vendors need to step up and just help with that particular problem. Because if you don't find that one event hidden, that needle in the haystack, you're just part of the problem. It doesn't matter if you find stuff, but if the people can't easily see that alert and react to it and have a way of triaging it, and honestly, Bob, this is where we move this conversation a little bit, because it's not all about the security controls that we've got. It's about having good hygiene inside our organization. I'm British, so I'm going to use this expression, but have we mapped out our crown jewels, right? So how do we know who the most important assets are, or what the most important assets are inside of our network, so that if there is an event, those events might tie to one of those critical assets. Well, that's going to move it right up the top of my list of things that I need to jump on. So there's definitely some hygiene that companies can do to do that exercise, that internal exercise of what keeps the lights on, what keeps the money coming in, what keeps the customer website active for our business. It's very specific to that company's business.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up the device thing. We've had a couple episodes where we've talked about a lot of security is around tracking user and user activity and what user was visiting what websites and things like that. But that network data of login user also needs to be device information. We talk about IoT and OT. So particularly companies in manufacturing, energy, and so forth. They'll have actually pretty much every network has more devices than they have users. Mm-hmm. And associating events with devices that don't have a user is a big blind spot for a lot of organizations. A lot of that network data, I'm trying to remember which episode it was, but it wasn't too long ago. We were talking about just the network. The network collects all sorts of information. And of course, Infoblox is really big on DNS and DHCP and IPAM. But there's so much information at the network level that helps them do a lot of automatic triage. Being able to automatically collect in one place, so that when I'm looking at those events, one of the big problems for even triage is, but I now need to go look at this information. I need to pull in these logs. I need to check those logs, and you pull it all together. And I need to wait for the SIM to massage it. Now I need to put in my query and get my view. That's not right. Let me tweak it. If I could have a lot of that automated, which is, people tend to think of automation as an automated response, that it's going to see the event and automatically, block the event and issue a warrant for the arrest of the person who did it. Whatever. People have some pretty crazy ideas of what it can do, but automation can have big wins if you just gather that kind of information automatically to help people. One place, I open it up, there's my event, there's my information, I can triage it pretty quickly.
Absolutely, Bob. I mean, I if I search the old memory banks back in a previous life for me, when I was a firewall administrator, if we saw an event alert come up on the firewall and we needed to find out what that device was, it was a case of going to the network infrastructure, looking at those ARP tables to try and find the MAC address, and that would give us an IP to a MAC conversion. But it's not good enough, because these devices are transient. I mean, we're talking about dwell time here. We're talking about stuff that's lingering on the network for a period of time. An IP address is, unless it's a static IP address, if it's a device that's coming on and off of the network, or it's IoT and it's grabbing it via DHCP, there is no guarantee that that's the same IP address on the Tuesday that it was on the Monday, right? So you do need to find that way of tying it all together and having a history, if you will, a bundle of data, both from the DDI land and from your security controls to tie together. Otherwise, it's a long task. It's a long task to try and build that forensic journey of what was the device, what's it doing, what else does it talk to.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody in oil and gas earlier today, and they were talking about how in the field, when they have a sensor or a control and it's not working, it's broken somehow, they don't try and troubleshoot it. They pull it out and pop in a new one, and then they'll take it back and troubleshoot it later. And sometimes it will, because of the way they have things configured with static IPs, it'll have the same IP address, but it's actually a different device. And then there's other scenarios where, banks with ATMs and stuff like that, when they have to replace those devices, they may not even replace the device. They may just go out, fix it, and restart it, and it gets a new IP address. So same device, different IP address. You have different devices with the same. There's so many ways that stuff can get convoluted. So having a good, I'm glad you pointed that out, because having something like an IPAM that can track that historical information, so that, again, and this is very important in dwell time. I'm not dwelling on that point, pun intended, just because that's what Infoblox's business is. the fact is that's what makes it so hard to often determine how long has this thing been on our network. Because if it has infected a certain segment of devices that, either the devices have had changes to them, but they still appear the same with the same IP address and stuff, or the addresses have been, the same address has actually moved to different equipment. I can't track that IP address. It was once used by this user's laptop, and then it was used by this BYOD device. You got to have all that stuff straight in order to investigate dwell time, because part of that, once you've done your triage and you found it, you got to know if you're going to get rid of it. Like, and again, you defined it really well. It's not just, hey, we now know we've been breached, end of dwell time. No, it's until you get rid of it. And that means finding everything that has been involved with that attack, even before you detected it. There may be small pieces of that attack on a machine that it didn't even trigger because it doesn't have the same malware that you're noticing now. It actually had a different piece of malware that it only used to compromise another machine. It was a tool that was used for lateral movement. But if you're looking for the same indicators, those indicators aren't going to help you find the other pieces of malware, because on your network in an advanced persistent threat, by that time, you may have a dozen different types of malware there, each one specialized and specialty purpose for a different task. Only one of those pieces of malware lit up. So when it comes to really rooting out one of these things and totally eliminating it, it gets messy fast.
Oh, it absolutely does. And I mean, you've got to be looking for stuff. And I think, obviously a lot of the time people focus on the user devices, so their laptops or their mobile devices. But, you've touched on IoT and OT already in this session. But I mean, there's also shadow IT. So I think I remember was it 2017, end of 2017, there was a story in the news about the fish tank in Las Vegas, right? There was a thermometer in the water, which just happened to be, wirelessly connected so that people could monitor the water temperature, keep the fish alive. Completely logical, right? I understand the use case, but that's a bit of kit that's on the IT network, which I'm going to go out on a limb and say was not sanctioned by the IT department. I mean, I've not met an IT department yet that specializes in buying fish tank thermometers. But, again, you've got to know where you're looking. So, I mean, if a MAC address and an IP address pops up and you start searching for the manufacturer of that to try and figure out what it is, there's no user tied to that device. How do you find it, right? I mean, the last place I'm going to go look is put my scuba gear on and go look in the fish tank. It's
Yeah, and I doubt that made it to the spreadsheets when people are using spreadsheets to track these IP addresses and stuff like that. Yeah, you've got third-party vendors coming in, and that's an important part. I mean, that's an extreme example, but how many devices are on your network today that they're not part of your IT, and that includes things like BYOD devices. I actually have an iPad right now that is in repair because it constantly pops up as a hotspot, even though I've turned off that feature. So if I am on the network, my iPad is a hotspot that allows anybody to connect to it, even though, again, I had password protection. That didn't, I mean, this iPad was really messed up. But somebody could have used that as a bridge, which is exactly how they use that aquarium. They use that thermometer as just a bridge to get through.
It's a means to an end, right?
Yeah. So when it comes to detecting these things, one of the things, again, that came up in our early conversations was command and control servers. That even though the malware, they might be placed throughout, there tends to be maybe one or a limited number of command and control servers that tend to oversee the whole thing. So one of the methods I've seen people use is, okay, we found an infected device. We see it because of certain activity. There are certain indicators. Let's see how many more devices we can find with those same indicators. And they find some stuff. But then they go back and they look at the time when those, they try to track back, how long has it been infected? Well, that thing's only been infected for like 2 weeks. Then they go look at all the activity back at that 2-week period, and they start noticing a lot of anomalous activity to the web. How many other devices had that? They find other devices. Instead of just the ones that were infected, that were also communicating to those same suspicious websites. Oh, so that's where it started. Well, no, you go back and check those. Go back to when they became infected. And oh, well, so that's how they became infected from something internal. And they start tracing this stuff around. You remember those old spy movies where they'd say, the guy would call in, says, quick, trace this call. And he went to, he's in Sydney, he's in Monaco, he's in, and it just bounces around the world until they find where it really came from. That's what it looks like today. When you start investigating dwell time, you will, or even any modern attack, that's what you're going to find. That's the lateral movement as they moved around your network until they found not just the thing. We tend to, again, oversimplify it in security. We'll say they're just looking for where you keep your credit cards. No, they're moving around to find out what you've got where. And once they've mapped out your whole network, they say, okay, so that one's got credit card information. This one's got employee data. This one, oh, hey, guess what? This is a hospital. They got medical data over here. Let's get that. And then they use different pieces of malware at the same time. So dwell time, again, I think you called it out perfect. It's not just until we find, oh, guess what? Looks like we've been breached. It's getting rid of it, which can also be days and weeks and months.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. I mean, it's
what
on
are your
your
customers
network until you've got rid of it. Facts.
Yeah. What are your customers kind of reporting about how long it takes to clean up something? What do you see, when you're talking to people out there?
You don't get a lot of facts and figures around that. People are pretty guarded for the most part around, A, what happened, and B, what they had to do to get rid of it. And of course, it depends on what the it is. So yeah, I mean, if it's ransomware, then how quick it is to recover very much depends on your strategy with regards to archiving and backing up those devices. Hopefully, I genuinely mean this. I would hope that most companies aren't paying the ransoms and ending up on payers list. But the sad fact is, some organizations do need to, just so they can get their systems, fingers crossed, get their systems back up and running in the shortest possible time. But again, then it comes down to the rest of your cyber and IT hygiene. So how often are you doing backups? Are you doing them often enough? If you were compromised with a ransomware attack and your files were encrypted or otherwise locked, how quickly could you go back to a state of readiness? How much data are you prepared to lose? What does that mean to your business? So yeah, there is no simple answer to your question, Bob. There isn't.
Well, there never is.
It's 10 minutes and we're done, but no, far from it.
Well, and I mentioned IOCs earlier, and you and I have been talking a lot about behavioral analytics offline here. Mm-hmm. Which of those do you think are finding the most value? Because everybody's investing in AI. Oh, hey, this product's got to be good. It's got AI, which 99% of the time it's just machine learning rebranded. So, but how much of the detection of not just hey, we've been in breach, but detecting all the different components so that we can actually get totally clean. How much of that's from just straightforward IOCs? How much of it's behavioral? Is behavioral helping any? Is this AI stuff helping?
Well, I think it does, right? I mean, it gives us another tool in the toolbox. Let me word it that way. I was going to say another arrow in the quiver, but whichever analogy you want to use. I think that we should always look at reputation, signature, and behavior. And different products, different controls can cover the different layers there, right? So from a purely feeds protective, reputation is super important. Whoever's providing your threat intel, are they curating that data? Are they getting rid of some of that noise before the feeds reach your infrastructure? And that's so important, right? Rubbish in, rubbish out. So if you're getting a curated feed, then of course, reputation data is fantastic. If I get a hit on that, I can trust it, I can act on it. But then we get into the conversation about things like 0 days. So what happens if something isn't on the list yet, right? I'm patient 0, no one else has been impacted. The clever folks at all the different security companies haven't yet seen this and built up any reputation on that. Well, what do I do then? And that's where there's a few different techniques, but behavioral can be one of those, because instead of looking for a very, very specific domain or a very, very specific IP address, now I can start to look at that pattern of behavior based on the data that's flowing across or out of my organization. I would also, I mean, hey, Infoblox DNS geeks, right? So I apologize for any listeners here who aren't DNS geeks, but I would also put newly registered and newly observed domains into that category of being able to be proactive about things that are chattering out in your network to entities out there on the internet, which again, don't have any reputation yet, but probably you don't want to be talking to. I always say to my customers, what business does any one of your users or devices have going to a website which is either A, just been registered in the last 3 days, or B, has only started passing traffic in the last 3 days? It's very rare that there would be a legitimate business purpose for that to go on. So again, you can start to look at that as a form of very lightweight zero-day protection. And then, of course, we get into signature land, right? And then we're into things like packet inspection and antivirus XDR clients and so on. And again, that's all good. But our customers, our partners, our friends out there, our friends listening to this podcast need to be aware of all three of those to have a truly robust solution. And again, I'm a realist, right? Defense in depth. You don't just take an intelligence feed from one vendor, you get it from 2 or from 3 vendors. Typically, very little overlap between the different providers and the different feeds, because they're pulling it from different sources and they're curating it and looking at it with a different lens through their specialty. So yeah, defense in depth, where possible, is the way to go. Not sure if that answered the question, Bob, or if I danced around it a little bit, but hopefully I answered it.
That's okay. You dance beautifully. But I'm glad you brought up the different feeds, because as I mentioned earlier, there are certain indicators that will pop up and help you find out that, hey, we've been breached. I can see some indicators that we've been breached. There's other indicators that are designed, and feeds that are designed to help when, this is going to block a URL that is known to host malware and going to deliver it. So you've got things that are a lot of feeds that are designed to prevent the initial infection. You have a lot of things to detect an actual breach in action, like they're starting to steal my data, they're starting to encrypt my system, whatever. But there are also feeds that different users and different organizations will find use in, that they're not good for either of those, but they are good at helping you find all those little systems in the middle. Some of these will be feeds that are specialized for like IPS devices and things like that. So there's certain device specific feeds. In the end, you need the right blend of feeds. And on the behavioral side, I wanted to point out, there's actually an article that just came up today on the Hacker News. Actually, no, it was yesterday on the Hacker News. No, they put today's date on it, but I saw it yesterday. I know it. And they were talking about IBM had been doing some investigation into TrickBot malware, and how they are upgrading the anchor DNS backdoor that they put in. That's a DNS tunnel that they put in. But again, the only way they detected this brand new twist on the old attack was that they were monitoring for abnormal activity on the DNS channel. They saw a new type of tunnel. They know what good tunneling looks like. They know how they use tunneling, what devices should be tunneling, what devices shouldn't. And they started catching it from devices that should never be tunneling anyhow, all of a sudden using a lot of bandwidth on DNS, which is a big gap. A lot of people don't look at that. So the anomalous behavior and the right mix of feeds, I think, is a good way to end this. Any final comments for anybody on how to detect and eradicate to get dwell time down?
I think I'll reiterate my previous statement. Defense in depth is key, first and foremost. So make sure that whoever's providing your intelligence, that it is curated so that you can trust the data. Make sure you're detecting via a variety of means. We talked about behavioral here, and we've seen crypto mining also using DNS as a method for transporting, communicating out to the service. But I mean, yeah, it's trying to find that needle in a haystack. And I think to reiterate a point that was made earlier, you've got your events, your logs, your alerts, and that's fine. And you're probably drowning under those. It's finding that way of really zeroing in, taking the 10,000 a day that you're receiving and filtering them down to the 20 a day that you can get to. And the only way you can do that is by really looking at, is the provider telling you, we gave you this hit because it's this risk profile, it's this confidence level, scoring it effectively. That helps you to triage. Then mapping out those critical assets, the critical infrastructure, that helps you to triage. So if you tie those two things together, you start to at least get closer to the holy grail of reducing that dwell time.
Well, fantastic. And thank you for this. Now, as usual, we've run out of time. You and I may need to talk offline about doing a part 2, because there's a number of things we skipped over rather quickly there. But Gary, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners for your time as well. Join us next time as we continue our efforts to help you stay on top of cybersecurity and ahead of cyber risks on Threat Talk.